Welcome back to DSR. We are covering the October Unearthed Arcana, which is the Psion updated, and I'm covering the Psykinetic subclass now. And spoiler alert, it's one thumbs up, one thumb sideways. So since I do a lot of work with rating things by role, because I think that makes the most sense, just rating something overall doesn't actually tell you what you're rating it for, and it kind of like boils everything down, averages things out either too much so that it's too averaged out and isn't useful, or it just simply reflects the bias of the person rating it. Moving on to the Psykinetic. Here are the design notes, and the Psykinetic is a subclass that's all around being telekinetic, mold psionic force for creation and destruction. All right, first up, the Psykinetic spells. There was a version of this in the May Unearthed Arcana, and it's exactly the same. Nothing changed. I will say, though, that I feel strongly that stone shape doesn't make sense here. It's not good mechanically for what this subclass is all about, and it's not good thematically or flavor-wise. Like stone shape is like temporarily, I don't know, liquefying stone and reshaping it into a different structure and then rehardens back to stone kind of thing, and that does not say telekinetic to me at all. I don't think it makes any sense, and they are hurting for good spells. Odok's Resilient Sphere is like a very niche spell. A lot of their spells are very niche. Cloud of Daggers is niche. Thunderwave is niche. They need a solid spell, and that one doesn't make sense. So I would replace it with Summon Contract or Watery Sphere, right? Scooping up a big section of water and then moving that around the battlefield, like snagging and snaring monsters with this, water that you're holding telekinetically makes perfect sense, and that's a good control spell, and it would be a good alternative to all the other control spells they have. A lot of the Scion's control spells don't work that way, so this gives them a good alternative for a different kind of control effect. And then Summon Construct, probably not as good power-wise here, because since the Scion already has a 3rd level and a 4th level summon spell, they get the Summon Astral Spirit at 3rd level and Summon Aberration at 4th level, spell level. So this would be another 4th level summon, but it would make more sense, right? You're using telekinesis to assemble, rock or different kinds of materials into this walking construct, and you're using your mind to keep it moving, things like that. I think it works thematically, maybe not quite as useful as, say, Watery Sphere, but either one of those would be a lot better than Stone Shape. Okay, next feature at level 3, and this only appears in the October version of the UA, stronger telekinesis. So you got the free mage hand from your Scion class. Now its range increases by another 30 feet, and you can carry 20 pounds instead of 10 pounds. Cool. Still pretty niche. I mean, mage hand is useful sometimes, being able to carry. It's not very often that the carrying weight comes into play. In fact, I think maybe once I can think of a time when the carrying weight came into play. So that will happen probably only once in a while. Very rare. And then the range, that's a little more useful. So this is cool. It's a ribbon. The next feature at level 3 is telekinetic techniques, which is in both versions, works largely the same. You get 3 different additional effects you can put on top of your telekinetic propel, which is a 1st level Scion feature that you get. And the first thing they added in the October version is that you can, instead of expending a psionic energy die, you can, for free, roll a 1d4. So it costs you nothing. You get to roll a 1d4, which is smaller than your psionic energy die, but at this level, your psionic energy die is a 1d6. So at level 3, this is almost as good and costs you nothing. Okay? So that's actually a great enhancement and makes this pretty, I don't know, kind of niche feature a lot more interesting and useful. The second thing they changed is that previously the only one of these effects that had a saving throw or that referenced the saving throw was the telekinetic bolt. Now, if you use telekinetic propel, the base feature that this is enhancing, that has a saving throw. So they just moved the reference to if it fails the saving throw to be above the 3 separate effects instead of inside the 1 effect. That way it applies to disorient, right? I guess it's a way of saving the amount of text they're writing, because it makes sense that you wouldn't auto disorient a creature, right? It's clear now that disorient and telekinetic bolt only apply when they fail the saving throw. So that's more clear. And boost, you would never want to you would never use that on an enemy. You would only use that on allies, right? You're giving one of your allies a little bit of boost, and your ally can simply choose to auto fail the saving throw so that they get the boost. So that part's a little awkward because it relies on the person knowing that the player, your ally, can auto say or auto fail a boost, auto fail a saving throw. It works mechanically. I wonder if they can just improve on that so that it doesn't rely on that niche that I think a lot of people may not be aware of, or some people won't be aware of. Level 6. In the May version, they had empowered attack mode. It was called that because it was reliant on the psionic mode concept that the May version of the Psion class had, which they removed for the October version, and I agree with it. It made the class overly complicated. So in the October version, they kept the feature, renamed it, and structured it so it doesn't rely on this attack mode concept. It's just at the start of any turn, you can just choose to expend a psionic energy die, and then you enter this enhanced mode, Psion Rage kind of thing for 10 minutes. And during that time, you can fly. Now, the old version had a 60-foot flying speed. This version has a 20-foot flying speed. And frankly, I think 60 feet was overpowered to just get for free without concentration. So concentration-free flight, that was a bit too much. So reducing it to 20 feet, I think makes sense. 10 feet is too little. 30 feet, 20 to 30 feet would have been just fine. Additionally, as long as you're in this mode, you get to add extra damage to any Psion spell you cast that deals damage. Okay. In the May version, it was extra damage equal to your intelligence modifier. In the October version, it's equal to one roll of a psionic energy die. Now, you don't expend it each time you add damage. The expenditure of the psionic energy die only happens when you initiate destructive trance. And then from then on, as long as you're in that trance, you get to add one psionic energy die for free to every damage roll of every Psion spell you cast. So this is actually pretty good and goes a long way to helping this subclass be a full blaster and compete with other blaster classes. The second feature they get at level 6 is Rebounding Field, which is, it works on shield. When you block an attack with shield, you can reflect some damage back on the attacker, and you gain temporary hit points. That all works the same, except for a couple of changes. First up is you expended one psionic energy die, and that's the same across both. But in the May version, you would then roll two psionic energy dice, and they would take that damage. And if they failed their save against the damage you just reflected, then you would also gain temporary hit points. In the October version, you expend one energy die, same as before, but now you only roll one psionic energy die, but now you add your intelligence modifier, which is at most levels, at many levels, I'll say, and certainly at this level, adding your intelligence modifier is probably right equal or maybe slightly better, and at higher levels, slightly less. It really depends on your level. So it's actually, but having that intelligence modifier is probably better in most ways because it makes the variance a lot lower, right? You're going to have a much tighter range on the both damage and temporary hit points you're going to gain from this. So I actually like this better, and I think it's less confusing. I think it's always a bit confusing to say I expend one of these dice, but then roll two of them. And they had lots of that kind of stuff in the May version. They also had lots of stuff where it was like expend two, roll one. So I think it just is better and more clear for players and DMs if the number that you roll always matches the number that you expend. So I do like this, and I think you'll have less of those feel bad moments where you rolled perhaps two dice and got ones on both of them. Right, the minimum you can get here is 1 plus your intelligence modifier, which is going to be a 4 or a 5. So your minimum is 5 or 6. A lot better. All right, and the last change they made was that you gain the temporary hit points regardless of whether the target fails the save. So in the May version, if they succeeded on the save against this reflected attack damage, you didn't get the temporary hit points. In the October version, you always get the temporary hit points. So that's better. And this is still not hugely strong, but it's nice, especially since it's not a reaction that replaces your usage of shield. It adds on top of shield. And that's one of the things I have an issue with any of these subclasses across any class where they're adding a reaction to a class that already has access to shield, right? A reaction that reduces damage. They did that in the arcane subclasses, Wizards one, where they added some reaction reactions to the subclass and it just cut the damage in half, but just use shield that's already on your spell list, which will block the entire attack and make you take none. So yes, there'll be times when shield isn't enough to block it. Like maybe you got crit, or maybe you just got a really high attack roll and the shield just won't help. But those are like 5-10% of the scenarios. So do you really want a whole subclass feature that's you're only going to use it in 5 to 10% of scenarios? And it's not, and in those scenarios, it's only because that's less, it's only going to block part of the damage, where shield would have blocked more damage. Anyway, I like this design a lot better, and I like that they use shield. Shield is a spell you should always have as a Psion, just so you don't get clobbered. And enhancing that is cool and nice, and it makes sense thematically for this kind of thing where you're enhancing your shield so it now reflects some of the kinetic energy that it blocks. Right? Cool. I like it. Level 10, enhanced telekinetic crush. Woo! This is both cool and disappointing. All right. First up, mostly or a lot of it's the same between the two. The first part is just simply you expend a psionic energy die, and regardless of whether the creature succeeds or fails your save against telekinetic crush, you cut their movement speed in half, which is pretty good, especially if they fail the save, because then they're prone and their movement's cut in half, which means if they stand up, they can't even move that turn. Okay, so that movement reduction is better than you think, but still left us feeling a little disappointing. So in October, what they added was, okay, well, you expended a psionic energy die, and now you get to roll it and add that to the damage roll of telekinetic crush. So I like that. And I do always like that whenever you're expending a die, it's always a bummer to not roll it, and a little confusing if you don't roll it and add it to something. So they've done that with a lot of features across all this whole document, where if you're going to expend a psionic energy die, you get to do something with it. So I like that. It's good. That makes this significantly better, especially since if you combine this with destructive trance that you got at level 6, that allows you to add one psionic energy die to any Psion spell that you cast that deals damage. So if you do that and this, you're now adding 2 psionic energy dice to the damage of telekinetic crush, which brings it from a subpar AoE damage effect to being pretty close, not quite, but pretty close to, like, say, a fireball. Close enough that you're not going to feel disappointing if you're compared to one of those classes. I'm going to get into some of those numbers more at the end. And then finally, this is why it's disappointing. It's disappointing because your whole 10th level feature, and by and large, Psions do not have a lot of AoE damage spells. They have very few, and overall, right? So here's the problem with this. Power-wise, it works great. Complexity is not too high. That all makes sense. Thematically, this is great. So the problem is that it's one spell, and you're getting it at level 10. And this is going to that makes this your signature AoE damage spell for your entire career, right? The rest of your career, that plus destructive trance makes this good enough that this is your signature AoE damage spell, right? That's what you got. You'll probably use it instead of like Abi Dalzum's Horde Wilting at 8th level spells even. Like this is probably still what you'll go for. And the problem with that is it will get boring, right? You're level 10, and the first, I don't know, dozen times you do this, it's going to feel awesome. After that, it's still going to have the same effect, but you're just going to get bored of it. Casting the same spell every round over and over and over again is going to get boring, I think. And, you're level 10, and if you're going in a campaign going from like level 1 to 20, then you're probably 30 or probably 25 to 30% of the way through the duration of the campaign, because it takes longer to go from level 10 to 20, a lot longer to go from 10 to 20 than it does to go from 1 to 10. So you're less than halfway through your session calendar playtime. How long before you're just sick of, telekinetic crush? Oh, look, hey, level telekinetic crush again, and you're by the time you hit level 20, if your campaign goes that long, you'll have cast this hundreds of times. I foresee players just getting bored of this and asking to switch to a new character somewhere before the end of this campaign, just because they're just tired of the same spell. So what do I recommend they change? Just modify it so that instead of being only telekinetic crush, have it be any Psion spell that deals force or thunder damage. Okay, they get a few of those. You got Shatter and Thunder Wave. This is, you got, and the Psykinetic has Cloud of Daggers, which is okay. That also deals force damage. So it's not going to be. It's not like you're going to suddenly, be able to apply this to 100 spells. You're talking like half a dozen, like 4 spells. I think it's just 4 spells. I mean, Blade Barrier at level 6. Okay, so you're talking 5 spells that this would work with now. Okay, and it's not like it's an overwhelming um, enhancement, right? You're talking about slowing them and 1 extra psionic energy die of damage. So that's not overpowered. And yeah, like all of the Scion's spells that they have access to that are AoE damage, they're all, as far as the damage goes, subpar. Now, the theme of Scions is that they also have this control effect. So all of their AoE damage spells also have debuffs that go along with it. And that is the theme of the Scion, right? They're very, very control focused, which I think is cool and works. So I don't think in any way is it going to be game breaking or overpowered or too much to just say this feature, you might have to rename it so it's not just Enhanced Telekinetic Crush. This feature just applies to any Scion spell. You can't apply it to Wizard and Sorcerer spells if you multi-class, but any Scion spell that deals force or thunder damage. That will be just fine. It's not going to be too powerful, and it's just going to feel a little better because then you're going to have some variety where you're going to use this feature on other spells and not just always Telekinetic Crush. Telekinetic Crush has the best synergy with it, so you might still use it most of the time with Telekinetic Crush, but you'll just have a little variety and it'll feel better. That's my recommendation. Level 14, we get Heightened Telekinesis, which was also in the May version, and this is your subclass Capstone. And it's a big enhancement to the Telekinesis spell, which thematically makes sense. Here are the changes. First up, in the 14th May version, you had to expend a spell slot and 4 psionic energy dice to do this. And the effect you got was it removed concentration and made the spell 1 minute duration and allowed you to use it on gargantuan sized creatures, which is everything. That now removes essentially creature and object size limits. Okay. So now you can use telekinesis on essentially anything because there's no upper limit on gargantuan. There's only a minimum size on gargantuan, which means you could move the planet with this, I guess. I don't know. They might need to put some boundaries on the object size. Okay, but as far as creature size goes, that means you can now use telekinesis on anything, any creature at all, which is a good enhancement and very thematic. Makes sense. The October UA version that changes it so that they remove the expenditure of the spell slot. So now you're just spending psionic energy dice instead of a spell slot, which I appreciate the enhancement, but that's strange, right? You're a full caster and your main feature is to get your main feature enhancement, you have to spend your secondary resource, not a spell slot. And frankly, I don't like that. And I have also the same problem with this feature that I did with the level 10 feature. It's all about a single spell, right? So as soon as you get to this level, I think maybe every round, every combat's going to turn into I cast telekinesis first, and then I cast another control spell, and then I just telekinetic crush until the end of time. I don't know. It's going to get very repetitive. And now they have 2 features. Well, really 3 features: the shield, telekinetic crush, and telekinesis. They're all based around a specific spell. Now the shield one isn't too bad because you're going to cast shield as a reaction anyway. So it's your reaction, right? That's not as important as what you're doing with your action. Your action is the most important thing to the player of what do I get to do on my turn? I've been waiting 10 or 15 minutes for my turn and I'm excited to use my turn, right? So that's what matters more. So really it's the level 10 and level 14 features that are the big problem, where it's just going to get repetitive because your big class features are just focused around these spells. So I would also recommend changing it so that this applies to other spells. Maybe you just list off the spells: hold person, levitate, slow, hold monster, and telekinesis. So it's not just one spell. So you could do a few of these other things and enhance it with this, right? That would add some variety, make it interesting, right? Like you might, levitate can be used on other creatures to kind of remove them from a battlefield by floating them up in the air. But since it takes concentration, you can only concentrate on one spell. You'll never do that because there's better concentration spells that come along later. But if you could remove concentration by this, you might cast it. That could be interesting. It gives you some interesting choices and options. So I would change it to this. I would put the spell slot expenditure back on, so you're spending your spell slots to do this. But I would then reduce the psionic energy dice cost and make it like the spell level divided by 2 rounded up. So for your second and third level for your second level spells, that means it costs 1 psionic energy die to enhance it this way. For your third and fourth level spells, it costs 2. For your fourth and fifth level spells, it costs 3. So reduce the psionic energy dice cost a little bit, keep the spell slot expenditure, give it a few more spells that it works with. And overall, here's the roll ranking that I would give. And you can see that I updated. If you watched the Metamorph video, you can see that I gave the base class a C as ranged, and I've since upgraded that to a B. I did some number crunching, and if you get destructive thoughts and apply it, I think that gives you a solid B, averaged out over the 20 levels as a ranged single target damage dealer. It's pretty good. But you have to get essentially shatter and destructive thoughts in order to get that B ranking for the base class, or to get an A ranking for this subclass. So I gave the subclass an A rank as a ranged damage dealer, and that's because of these factors plus your destructive trance, which adds another psionic energy die damage. You spend it once to enter the trance, and then you get to add 1 free damage die to every spell you cast. So it's a very efficient way to boost the damage, and then you can do destructive thoughts on top of that. And if your intelligence is 20, that means you could add 5 psionic energy dice from destructive thoughts, plus 5 from your intelligence modifier, plus 1 more psionic energy die from destructive thoughts. So you might be burning 1 psionic energy die at the start of combat, and then 5 more for every spell you cast until you run out of psionic energy dice, which is not going to be very long at that burn rate. I mean, you have 12 max, right? So it's not going to last long. You maybe get 2 spells if you're burning max, your max burn rate with destructive thoughts. But if you do that, your damage to one of those targets is going to be pretty good. I think, I haven't done the hardcore, number crunching for all of the ranged. Unfortunately, I haven't done that video yet, so I don't have all the hardcore number crunching for the ranged rolls. But I think that this lands in an A tier for that. But that is one of my problems with the Psion class overall. First up, you have to take destructive thoughts to get this damage. Second, it only works with conjuration or evocation school spells that force a saving throw. And you, or most of you, probably like me, when I first read this feature, I thought, wow, that's awesome, because there are so many damage dealing conjuration evocation spells that cause a saving throw. Like, there's just hundreds of them, right? It's probably the most prevalent damage spell there is, categories that right there. And if this feature were on a wizard or a sorcerer, it would probably be OP. But if you look at the Psion spell list, they don't have most of them. They literally have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on their entire spell list. They have 6 spells that qualify for this. At level 1, it's Thunder Wave, which is not a great spell. Like, you mostly use that if you're stuck in melee and you want to push enemies back and try to escape, right? That's the main use of this. But yeah, you can add destructive thoughts damage to that if you can position it right. Level 2, it's Shatter, which is the best AoE damage spell at level 2. But as soon as you get Fireball at level 3, you never cast Shatter again. Shatter is a disappointing damage spell. But you have to have that if you want to be effective at range damage dealing to a single target, because destructive thoughts only applies the damage bonus to one of the targets in the spell, not all of them. So that's why it's kind of makes you this weird single target damage dealer, but not with attack rolls. It specifically has to be a saving throw spell, and then you do a lot of damage to one of those. At third level, you can get Bleeding Darkness, which is a concentration spell, and it's not a good spell. Like, it's a very cool flavor thematic spell. They need to enhance it, but it's a garbage spell right now. Then at level 6, Blade Barrier, another concentration spell, and Psionic Blast. Psionic Blast is actually a great spell. And so, yeah, I don't feel bad at all using destructive thoughts on Psionic Blast. But yeah, you've got to wait till level 6. So from level 3, when you get Shatter, until level 11, when you get Psionic Blast, you're just using Shatter all the time to get this damage. You're just Shatter, Shatter, Shatter. You have one spell that you can use at range to do a bunch of damage to one target. Like, they need to fix this so there's some variety and that you're not just enhancing one of the worst AoE spells there is. I mean, it's the best at level 1 and 2, but it's after that, it's not, you usually dump Shatter and you never put it back on your spell list. And you just have to use it because you just don't have access to any other spells. And it's not like you can multi-class to make this work, because this says, yes, that it only works on Psion spells. So even if you multi-class to get access to some better AoE spells, you can't use Destructive Thoughts on those spells. So please, everybody, fill out the survey. Tell them they need to add more of these spells that qualify for Destructive Thoughts specifically to the Psion spell list. And it's got to be, and there's another gotcha there, which is the saving throw, right? They've got, what is it? Telekinetic Fling, which is an evocation spell, and Life Siphon, which is an evocation spell. But those are attack rolls, so they don't qualify for this. It has to be a saving throw. So they got to add more spells that qualify to this. And frankly, 3, so this plus 2 of the other psionic disciplines have the same problem, although it's not quite as bad as this one. This is the worst one, where you have just the fewest number of spells that qualify. We're literally talking 6 spells total that qualify. The psionic disciplines of biofeedback and bolstering recognition don't fare as poorly as Destructive Thoughts, but it's still not great. You have like, I don't know, 15 or 20 spells that qualify for each of those, biofeedback and bolstering recognition. So it's still a problem. We need a few more spells that qualify for those psionic disciplines. We need a lot more that qualify for Destructive Thoughts. And Aid Insinuation does just fine. And here's the table of number crunching, where I proved to myself that the Psykinetic doesn't quite qualify for an A tier AoE damage. They're super close. If I used pluses and minuses, they would be like a B plus maybe. Like if this were a percentage scale, they'd be, and 90% was the bottom cutoff for A. These guys are like 88, 89%. They're really close. They're not quite there yet. If you compare them with a sorcerer or a wizard or any other strong AoE blasters, these guys are going to feel, as far as damage numbers, disappointing. Now, I don't think they're going to feel disappointing overall, because whenever they're doing AoE damage, they also have a rider effect that's hindering enemies in some way, unless you're just doing Shatter. Shatter has no riders. But anything else, and your primary rider or primary AoE spell is going to be Telekinetic Crush, and it's got some good riders. You've got 2 riders. You knock them prone and you cut their speed in half. So you're not actually going to feel disappointed that way, because you're going to do a little less damage but apply control effects, which is why they're still a strong controller. So they're following that theme of being a strong controller as far as Psions go. It's just their damage is a little subpar. I don't think that that's a big problem. Some people might. And if you really want to feel like you're a competitive blaster, I think that they need to make this change anyway, right? Here is, if they just change this one spell, which is your signature spell, Telekinetic Crush, change it from a transmutation spell to an evocation spell, which I think makes more sense anyway, right? You're blasting them with telekinetic energy. You're not using telekinesis to grab them. You're blasting with telekinetic energy. So like Telekinetic Fling and Life Siphon, I think this should be an evocation spell. If they just change that spell school, literally just change that, it now qualifies for Destructive Thoughts. And you could be adding a bunch of damage to one of the targets. Now you might say like, oh, that doesn't, that goes against what you described as an AoE blaster. On one hand, yes. On the other hand, it's not. It's actually very common that when you're dropping an AoE spell on creatures, that they don't all have the same amount of health left. And then a lot of them don't even start with the same amount of health. And so it can be pretty useful. And so a lot of times you see a scenario where my AoE spell will probably kill, this 1 or 2 really weak wins. But if you could add a bunch of damage to one of them, that might be enough to kill another one. So your AoE effect spell might kill 2 or 3 instead of 1 or 2 and damaging the rest. And so I actually think it does make you a better AoE blaster to ensure that you're killing or getting close to killing one more creature every time you blast. So if they just change that one thing, I think Wanda approves and they get an A as a blaster. So if everybody, please fill out the survey and insist on this change as well. They got to change Telekinetic Crush to an evocation spell, which they need to do anyway, because it's just lame that they have only 6 spells that qualify for this major class feature. They got to have more than 6 spells. And overall, a thumbs up. This class, I think, its power level is good. I think its theme is great. I think almost everything about it is great. The reason they get the yellow sideways thumb is for the design. The design point specifically of too much of their class is focused on just a couple spells. And so I think it will get boring. So even though it's fine power wise, even though its flavor and theme is fantastic, I think people will just get bored with it after the 100th time of casting Telekinetic Crush. So if you agree with that, put it in the survey feedback. Let's make some changes. They actually seem to be pretty good about listening to the feedback from these surveys and implementing it. So I think it can make a difference if enough of us say something about this. So yes, please jump on board. Let's make a difference. And thanks for watching. Hope you tune in for the next one.